On September 1, 2006, Susan Walters, previously known as Susan Kuhnhausen, worked in the intensive care and resuscitation department at Portland Hospital in Oregon. After finishing her shift on the 6th, she decided to stop by a beauty salon before heading home to get a new hairstyle and take some time for herself to relax after a long day. She left the salon feeling rejuvenated and refreshed. Perhaps the saying crossed her mind that when a woman changes her hairstyle, it means she's about to change her life. Susan couldn't have imagined how true this expression would turn out to be. She arrived at a one-story blue house in the traditional Cape Cod style, surrounded by a neat grey fence. Susan entered through the back entrance of the house. In the hallway, next to the microwave, she found a note from her husband, Mike. He mentioned that he had to leave and had gone to the beach. He added that they would see each other on Friday, or Saturday. Unlocking the kitchen door, Susan heard the sound of the security system. She entered the code to deactivate it, walked to the front door, and stepped out into the front yard. It was a clear and warm September evening, and Susan allowed herself a minute or two to check the mail in the fresh air. Returning inside, she finally took off her shoes and noticed that the bedroom was unusually dark. It was unusual because she always pulled back the curtains in the morning. However, she dismissed it, thinking that she had been in a hurry and forgot to do it, and continued further into the room. Suddenly, a man appeared behind the bedroom door. Standing at 180 centimeters tall and weighing around 90 kilograms, he appeared as a massive giant emerging out of nowhere. He wore a striped shirt and a baseball cap, pulled low over his eyes. His long gray hair was tied back into a ponytail, hidden under the cap. A matching gray beard and mustache completely covered the remaining part of his face, creating an even more frightening impression. The sight of yellow rubber gloves on his hands, with a hammer held in one of them, horrified Susan. The most natural reaction for most people, upon seeing a stranger with a hammer in their bedroom, would be to flee. However, Susan couldn't be categorized as an ordinary person. As a 51-year-old woman who had worked as a nurse in the intensive care and critical care unit for 30 years, she knew how tough it was. She had dealt with injured men writhing in pain, subdued patients who had taken forbidden substances. And to be able to handle any of those situations while keeping a clear head, she, like other hospital nurses, regularly trained in the art of self-defense. They knew how to dodge a strike or break free from a hole. Years of training had made Susan confident in herself. Therefore, when the stranger tried to attack her with the hammer, she didn't run away. Instead, she lunged towards him. She knew that the swing of the hammer would be significantly weaker if she got up close. Nevertheless, one blow to her temple turned out to be extremely painful. Overcoming the pain, she shouted as loudly as she could, "Who are you? What do you want?" But he didn't answer, and he didn't stop. Susan, with her height of 164 centimeters, was much shorter than the man, and her knees hurt from several surgeries. However, she was heavier than the stranger. Hoping to use this advantage, Susan threw herself at him with her body. He didn't fall. Instead, he pushed her back against the wall. Then he uttered his first and only words for the evening. "You are strong," he said to her. Those words sent waves of adrenaline through Susan's body. Suddenly, she realized that the stranger had come to her home not to rob, to kill her. She didn't know why, she didn't know who he was, but his intentions were clear, and she wasn't going to wait for it to happen. Susan pushed him for the second time. "Who sent you?" she shouted again. Silence was the only response. Fortunately, somehow, the woman managed to knock the hammer out of his hand, after which she struck him in the head 3 or 4 times. When he regained control of the tool, Susan grabbed his throat. "Who sent you here?" she asked again, using her hands to cut off his airflow. The stranger's face reddened, then turned purplish, and finally almost blue. Susan panicked and let go of his throat. She was in pain, exhausted, and just wanted to escape from there. But before she could run out of the bedroom into the narrow hallway, the man caught up with her. He pushed her and hit her, smashing her lip. The memory of what happened next haunts her to this day. He stood over her with the hammer, and as Susan looked down at the floor, she thought she would die. But if she was destined to die, people needed to know that she fought for her life, she thought. She couldn't explain how she did it, but she managed to knock the man down on the floor next to her and started biting him, so that in the event of her death, tooth marks would connect her to her killer. Rolling on the floor with the man, she bit his hand, thigh, and even tore the zipper on his pants to reach the groin area. But even that wasn't enough for her. With her hand, she felt the man's clothing, trying to find any identification or evidence she could later hide under the bed or in a closet, to be discovered by the police. The struggle continued for a whole 14 minutes, when she threw her left leg over the intruder, climbed on top, and wrapped her left arm around his neck. "Tell me who sent you here, and I'll call an ambulance for you," she shouted. He didn't say anything. Instead, the intruder simply growled, refusing to let her get off his back. Susan leaned in, pressing her hand harder against his throat. After some time, the man stopped moving. Susan grabbed his hammer and ran to the neighbor's house, who called 911. The emergency dispatcher could barely believe her ears when Susan's neighbor informed her that the injured woman had potentially strangled an unknown intruder who had broken into her house to kill her. The operator clarified what exactly the injured woman had done, and the neighbor explained that Susan had performed a chokehold and struck the man several times with a hammer. When asked if the injured woman needed an ambulance, the neighbor replied that she was a nurse herself, and the ambulance was needed for the man. The dispatcher asked the women not to touch the hammer anymore and assured them that the ambulance was already on its way. The arriving paramedics took Susan to the hospital where she worked. That's when her worst fears were confirmed. She learned that the man who attacked her was dead. It didn't take investigators much time to establish the man's identity. They found an identification card in his back pocket. Ed Haffey was a 59-year-old Vietnam War veteran, who had long been on the police's radar. As Susan received medical care, she delved into contemplation about her life, trying to understand who could have wanted her dead. Susan's childhood was not easy. Her parents loved her, but they couldn't demonstrate through their own experience what a happy marriage was like. Her mother was a homemaker, and her father was a chef in the Air Force, so their life was quite chaotic. The family moved from Colorado to Arizona, California, and Nevada, constantly having to adapt to new schools and homes. Susan's parents divorced when she was in the 2nd grade. In the early 80s, as Susan grew up, she worked as a nurse and moved to Oregon, where her romantic life took a turn in 1988. Susan's friend and mother paid for a personal advertisement in the newspaper, written in a playful and cheerful tone characteristic of Susan, stating that she was ready for a serious relationship. She received several responses, including one from a 39-year-old man named Mike Kuhnhausen, who wrote that he loved nothing more than walking along the beach at sunset. Susan and Mike communicated over the phone for a long time. He had a pleasant voice and was not afraid to discuss serious topics. Their first date in February 1988 took place at the Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden, where they fed ducks and threw unsalted peanuts to squirrels. Within a year, they got married. However, their married life didn't go smoothly from the beginning. Long walks in the park became a thing of the past. Susan's husband was against her spending time with friends and demanded an account for every penny spent, despite her being the main breadwinner. They didn't have any children, and soon Susan realized that her husband had never been happy and didn't believe that he could make her happy. Eventually, Mike found a job at a company that had one of its branches selling adult videos. But after 17 years of marriage, Susan decided she had had enough. She still cared for her husband, but she no longer wanted to live with him. She wanted to feel happy again. In September 2005, she asked him to leave the house. Mike moved into his father's house. However, they maintained a friendly relationship, and he often visited the house to spend time with Susan's cats. Therefore, Susan didn't change the locks or the alarm code, 1210, the date of their wedding. And that turned out to be a big mistake. On the very next day after the attack, Susan returned home in the company of her friend Helen Bulone to gather her belongings. It was Helen who noticed a backpack in the basement, which shouldn't have been there. The police didn't notice the backpack because Susan's basement, like any other, contained a variety of different things. Inside the backpack, there were dessert syrup, diabetes medication, $200 in cash, a diary, and a receipt for a payment made to Ed Haffey. According to the diary entry, on September 4, 2006, the man was supposed to call Mike. It also included Mike's new mobile number, Susan's husband. As the autopsy revealed, Haffey had taken an almost lethal dose of prohibited substances before breaking into Susan's house. Recently, the man had been living in a trailer, although his relatives told the police that he grew up in a wealthy family, and was a successful tennis player. However, 15 years ago, Haffey committed a heinous crime. In 1991, he organized the murder of his former girlfriend, 39-year-old Georgia Lee Dutton. Her body was found in the Umpqua River, near Roseburg. Haffey admitted his guilt and spent the following 9 years in prison. After his release in November 2003, he moved to Portland, where he naturally started looking for work. He found it in July 2004 when Mike Kuhnhausen hired him to clean floors at a store that sold adult videos. The police discovered that on the day of the attack on Susan, Mike headed to the coast and checked into a hotel, the Lincoln City Inn. During the night, he returned to Portland and the following day purchased a Taurus .357 Magnum revolver from a pawn shop. On September 8, Mike left a farewell note at his father's house stating, "All I wanted was to be loved, and every time I achieved that, I ruined everything." Afterward, he went on the run. The police issued a warrant for his arrest. He was apprehended on September 13 in the parking lot of the Kaiser Sunnyside Medical Center where, according to Mike, he intended to seek help at the psychiatric department. He told the officers that he felt a sense of purposelessness in life. The police didn't believe his claims of innocence. A few weeks prior, Mike Kuhnhausen had lost his job, and he didn't have a place of his own to live. Susan had listed her brother as the beneficiary of her insurance policy in case something happened to her, and Mike was aware of this. However, Susan and Mike had managed to pay off the mortgage on their house, which was worth $300,000, and it would remain his if Susan died. Initially, Mike tried to assert that he didn't even know Haffey, but the detectives had already obtained company documents to prove their acquaintance. Mike had to admit that he knew Ed Haffey, but that didn't mean he had done anything. However, other evidence emerged pointing to a conspiracy between the two men. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, but the security system records showed that someone had deactivated the alarm while Susan was at work. Mike claimed he had turned it off when he left the note but denied letting Haffey into the house. However, on September 18, Haffey's former accomplice contacted the police, stating that Haffey had asked him to join him in an insurance fraud scheme, as he explained it. He and Haffey met with the contractor in town, who turned out to be Mike Kuhnhausen, who promised to pay the man $5,000 if he helped Haffey kill his wife. The man of course refused. On November 17, another witness told the police that he had given Haffey a ride to meet a bald man in a parking lot. Several days later, he saw the man's photo on the news after the attack on Susan. It was Mike Kuhnhausen. Mike could deny anything he wanted, but the evidence against him was mounting, and on August 30, 2007, he confessed to ordering his wife's murder. During the trial, Susan took the stand and said, "You wanted me to share a life with you until death parted us. Turns out, you were hoping the sooner it happened, the better. If I believed you deserved to die, I would have had the courage to do it myself," she added. Mike was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Immediately after the sentencing, Susan filed a lawsuit for $1 million to ensure that he wouldn't have enough money left for another contract. Mike was supposed to be released on September 14, 2014. His ex-wife was ready for it. Once vibrant and adventurous, the new Susan became quite cautious. In restaurants, she always sat facing the door. She took a new route to work, and if she felt someone was following her, she would circle the block for a while, trying to shake off a possible pursuer. She moved to a new house in Portland, situated on a dead-end street surrounded by gravel, so she could hear footsteps if someone decided to approach the door or window. And in the neighboring garage, she practiced shooting. "I'm serving a life sentence for choosing the wrong husband," she joked. Susan did everything possible to ensure that Mike would never get close enough to harm her, but her ex-husband never had the chance to try. On Friday, June 13, 2014, he died of cancer, 92 days before his release. The letters from the man in prison show that he never truly acknowledged his guilt and only confessed to the crime to avoid a longer sentence. Mike believed that he was the real victim of what happened. Susan admits that she doesn't mourn his departure but mourns his life, which he could have had if he had only opened his heart to the people who loved him. And she regrets that he died in prison, far away from everyone who ever loved him. During Mike's imprisonment, Susan tried to find information about his release and her rights after his release, realizing that it is not easy for a crime victim to obtain the information they seek. Therefore, in 2017, together with the District Attorney's Office, she created a free website called Case Companion, dedicated to supporting crime victims in the region. It answers all the victims' questions about the justice system. Additionally, once charges are filed by the District Attorney's Office, victims can track the defendant's court dates, sentencing details, and information about when the convicted person will be released. Susan continued working as a nurse until December 2014. For a long time, she didn't understand why her colleagues called her a hero when her job was always about saving lives. Her supervisor explained it to her. They called her a hero not because she killed a person, but because they want to believe that if they were in a similar situation, they would also be able to survive. Even after so many years, Susan cannot remember what happened without tears. She confesses that when she heard about Hafi's death, she immediately thought of his family. Everyone has someone who loves them. Children, a wife, a mother, a father. The worst part of what happened is not that someone tried to kill me, but that I had to kill someone to survive. But I'm not ashamed because I didn't choose his death. I chose my life. I chose to live. In 2010, understanding Susan's torment, Aunt Ada Duffy wrote her a letter assuring her, although what happened was terrible, no one in this family thinks poorly of you. You did what you had to do, and by doing so, you protected many from a similar fate. Susan finds solace in helping others understand that they can also survive after an attack. If you can't run and can't hide, you have to fight, she says. You can't know that you won't survive.